Good afternoon and welcome back to our KTA Breaking News session, again with Teresa Rasoka
and Christian Liko.
And we are back to the reported attacks in Caucasus. The situation has turned more tense when Russian military units began mobilization near Georgian borders. Few hours after sunrise, more shootings have been heard on the borders, and Irakli Garibashvili, Georgian Prime Minister, declared the country to be under attack and call in all military units and backups. More attacks and shootings have been reported. Some sources claim casualties on both sides. We are now about to talk to Dmitry Prasodyev, directly from northern Svaneti.
Greetings to Prague once again. As you may hear, Russian units are just arriving to the city of Kaspi near borders, to the great displeasure of locals. I can see at least 5 transport helicopters approaching, and more are probably arriving. The bases in Gwadata and Sukhumi are sending in more troops. Villagers living near northern borders of the country have seen Russians moving from Russia across the Yushaba Trail. As my local source confirmed to me, the situation is getting really tense. Local villagers feel directly threatened and keep repeating that the Russians should leave. An older man living here for decades said that he has never seen such an overreaction, and he does not understand the reason for occupation. People here are concerned about the stability in the region because the last time Russians came, they did not leave anymore. But although the tension is incredibly strong, the amount of casualties is thank God still low, not more than 5 soldiers on each side. We hope that the situation will not change as the Russian troops arrive to Mestia, capital of the region where Georgian army is fortified and preparing for Russian attack.
Thank you, Dmitry. As we heard, the situation is getting critical, and the international community should start considering proper reaction. Leaders of world powers already made their statements.
This is an outrageous threat to security of our people and to sovereignty of our country. We call on our partners to make a decisive protective move. Georgia wishes for peace in Caucasus and stable relations with its neighbors. We do not want this issue to become another long-term conflict, only depriving Georgians of their normal lives. But in this time of violent outbursts, the security of peaceful Georgians living in the northern part of the country comes first. Russians made another hasty decision proving their disregard to the international law, and we will defend our land.
Our troops do not have an order to fight, but only to use force if necessary. Security of Russians is a top priority, and if citizens or soldiers are threatened on base or in a field, they must protect themselves, and that is why the troops cross the border. We do not wish to escalate the conflict, but we are not convinced that Georgian terrorists will be brought to justice by the government itself, and therefore we decided to take justice in our own hands. I call upon the government of Georgia to restrain from military actions to prevent the conflict escalation. Otherwise, we would have to defend ourselves further.
The US Secretary of State John Kerry called for diplomatic resolution and urged Russia to withdraw its troops from a sovereign country of Georgia. He said that the presence of Russian troops in Svaneti is unacceptable and cannot be tolerated without response. Nevertheless, he stressed that the hope of the United States and everybody in the world is not to see any conflict to escalate into a military confrontation. First Ukraine and now Georgia. Any confrontation cannot serve the world well, but the world cannot blindly tolerate steps of aggression by any country. He told us that we want a peaceful resolution through the normal process of international relations, but we need a definite position towards this issue if we want the cooperation to function well. And also the European Union took a stance towards Russian aggression.
We strongly condemn any use of force in this region and call for diplomatic resolution of the conflict. We are highly disappointed by the steps of Russian government which might undermine the hard-earned peace in the Caucasus. Any unnecessary aggression in this region only burn the weak bridges. Consequently, we need the diplomatic agents to begin fierce negotiations and pressure Russia to refrain from any form of violence in Abkhazia and Svaneti.
The stance of NATO is therefore highly awaited. We bring you recent statement made by the Secretary General Rasmussen.
Committed to Georgia's sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders, and we call on Russia to implement all of its obligations with regards to Georgia. As we have made clear, the building of fences and other obstacles is unacceptable, and it is contrary to international law and Russia's own commitments. It hampers the free movement and livelihood of the population, and it should be reversed. The 21st century is for bridge building, not fence building. Prime Minister, we stand by our commitments. At the Bucharest summit in 2008, we decided that Georgia will become a NATO member, provided you meet the necessary requirements.
And today, the Secretary General added to his previous statement that Georgia is an important ally for NATO and the North Atlantic Council is deeply concerned about the situation in Svaneti. Extraordinary meeting has been summoned for this issue and the ambassadors are about to negotiate further steps. Now, once again, we have the pleasure of welcoming our AMOS expert, Jakob Limper, in the studio. Jakob, what is the role of international organizations in this crisis?
Well, it's clear that now a decisive step is expected from NATO. As Russia will veto any move by the United Nations Security Council, NATO became the most significant platform for resolution of this conflict. But the experience from Kosovo is still in live memory of the alliance. The unprecedented move of military action without Security Council permission is probably the most criticized action in NATO history, and the second breach of prohibition of usage of strength without the UNSC consent might put the alliance in a very hard position. However, Georgia is a partner country to NATO, with one foot already in the alliance, and NATO needs to set clearly how it deals with partner countries in the process of joining the alliance.
Some are mentioning the Ossetian crisis in 2008. Is this case similar to the one we have seen 6 years ago?
The parallels drawn with South Ossetian war in 2008 might be misleading. In the case of Svaneti, there is no ethnic conflict, and also protection of Russian citizens is disputable, although the Russians use this as an excuse. Moreover, current Georgian government is not as hostile to Russia as the one in 2008, when it attempted to regain control over Ossetia. Several restrictions against Russia were leveled. However, if we look into the history, in the last 213 years, Georgia has not been part of Russia for only 30 years. Therefore, the Russians, who still see themselves as an empire, see the Georgian independence with despite. Their current operation is either proof of Russian military strength, after which the Kremlin will withdraw its forces back, or it is a bold move to spread the Russian influence further to Georgia. Neither of these options is very bright, and it is clear that the international community has to take a stance toward the issue. And of course, some even say that invasion into Svaneti region is just the first step that will result in annexion of the whole Georgia. Hopefully, these estimations will not become true.
As we have heard from the top representatives, the situation needs to be resolved fast, if we do not want to let it turn into an exhausting war. Opinions differ greatly, but one is certain. Everyone eventually wants a peaceful and secure Svaneti. The UN Security Council now has its hands tied, and international actors turn to NATO with eager expectations of the outcome of their negotiations.
Thank you, Chris. And now for something completely different. We have another breaking story here. The newly born panda has made its first